My son did not know I was sitting in the kitchen when he said to his sister, "She left her keys in the freezer again. That's 3 times this month. That's all we need." He said it quietly, carefully, the way people say things they have been rehearsing. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, quite still, because I had heard the front door and decided to wait rather than call out. The kettle had been noisy. They did not know I was there. My daughter said, "Do you think she's ready?" My son said, "She doesn't have to be ready. We just need the right documentation." I sat with my tea until it went cold. Then I stood up, walked to the hallway and said good morning. They both looked at me the way people look when they have been caught doing something that has not yet been named. My name is Eleanor. I'm 78 years old. I served as a judge in the family courts for 26 years. I retired 9 years ago, and in that time I have watched my mind remain exactly as it was, precise, methodical, and considerably less patient with dishonesty than it once was. I left my keys in the freezer once. I was distracted by a phone call. I have not done it since. But that is not the point of the story my children were already writing about me. I have spent a career understanding how evidence is constructed, how a narrative is assembled from selected facts, arranged in a particular order to produce a conclusion that feels inevitable. My children are not stupid people. My son is a solicitor, not a brilliant one, but a competent one. My daughter manages a small property company. They understand process. They understand documentation. And they had been building a case against me for, I came to understand, approximately 8 months. The freezer keys were the 3rd entry in a list that had been forming quietly. There was also the afternoon I drove to the wrong supermarket, which I attributed to habit and they attributed to confusion. There was an evening I could not immediately recall a name at dinner, which they had written down, I later discovered, with a date and time. I did not confront them when I understood this. That is not how I have ever worked. I began instead to keep my own records. My house is a Victorian terraced property in a city I have lived in for 51 years. My late husband and I purchased it in 1979 for £42,000. Its current value, according to the last independent assessment, is slightly over £900,000. There is a further property in the Scottish Highlands that was left to me by my sister, which I have let for income since her death. My estate, in total, is considerable. My children know the house, they do not know everything else. I have never seen a reason to discuss it. I became aware through a letter delivered in error to my address, rather than my solicitor's, that my son had made an inquiry to a specialist care home in the county, a premium facility. The inquiry included a note about anticipated timelines and capacity assessments. I read the letter twice. I placed it in my document folder. I made myself a fresh cup of tea. Then I telephoned my own solicitor. I want to be honest about what I felt during those weeks, because it would be easy to describe this as a story of strategy, and I do not want you to think it was. It was grief, primarily. The particular grief of being looked at by people who have known you all their lives, and finding that they see something other than you. My son has my husband's coloring, and my husband's way of pressing his lips together when he is thinking. My daughter used to fall asleep on my lap during long drives, her head against my arm. These people did not arrive as strangers. They arrived as the best parts of my life. And so I have spent time asking myself what I may have contributed to this. Whether the distance that developed after my retirement, the weeks between visits, the conversations that thinned over time, whether that distance created a space in which a different version of me could grow. A version assembled from occasional observations and the quiet, persistent fear that people have of watching a parent age. I do not excuse what they were planning, but I have tried to understand it. That is different. What I know professionally is this: a person can only be removed from their home against their will through a formal legal process, requiring medical assessment, corroborating evidence of incapacity, and, in most jurisdictions, a court order. I have presided over such processes. I know their requirements and their weaknesses. I also know that a motivated family with a cooperative GP and selectively curated evidence can, in certain circumstances, create a picture that is difficult to immediately contradict. What I had that most people in my position would not have was 26 years of understanding how that picture is made and how it can be unmade. I began to document everything, not defensively, methodically. A daily journal, dated and timed. Cognitive tests, self-administered, results retained. Witness statements from my neighbors, my GP, my bridge club, my solicitor. A formal psychological assessment arranged privately and conducted by a specialist who did not know my children. And the recording. I had installed a small audio device in the sitting room 18 months earlier, after a series of burglaries in the street. My children knew it existed. They did not consider, when they sat in my sitting room on a Sunday afternoon in March and discussed in reasonable detail their plan to have me assessed and placed, that it was recording. 23 minutes and 40 seconds of audio, clear, time-stamped. I want to stop here for a moment and say something that the recording did not capture. I sat in my study and listened to those 23 minutes for the first time on a Tuesday evening in early April. Outside it was raining, the kind of slow, persistent rain that does not announce itself. I listened to my children discuss what to do with my house. I listened to them discuss the timelines, the costs, the complications. I listened to my son say, "She'll be angry at first, but she'll adjust. They all do." I am a woman who has spent her professional life in rooms where people said terrible things about other people. I have maintained composure through confessions, through cruelties, through things I carry still. I believed I had learned not to be devastated by the worst that people can do. I was wrong. Not because what my children planned was the worst thing I had heard. It was not. It was, by the standards of a family court, almost ordinary. But because it was them. Because I remembered every ordinary Tuesday of their childhoods. Because love, when it is betrayed by the people who required it most, lands differently than any other pain. I am telling you this because I think it is important not to allow the legal competence to obscure the human cost. I knew what to do. Knowing what to do did not make it hurt less. I cried that evening, properly, for a long time. The dog sat beside me. That is all I will say about that. Then I made a second cup of tea, which has always been my way of signaling to myself that the crying is finished and the work must begin. I asked my children to come to the house on a Saturday morning in May. I told them I wanted to discuss some matters relating to my estate. I said this calmly, and they came. They sat in the sitting room, in the same chairs they had occupied in March. I served coffee. I asked about their week. My son asked if I was feeling well. I said I was feeling very well indeed, thank you. Then I placed 3 items on the table. The first was the letter from the care home, which had been delivered to me in error. The second was a bound copy of my own documentation, the journal, the assessments, the witness statements, the psychological report. The third was a printed transcript of the recording, with the audio file available on a small drive beside it. I did not say anything dramatic. I am not a dramatic person. I said, "I think it is better that we discuss this openly rather than allow it to continue. I have also forwarded copies of these materials to my solicitor with instructions." My son looked at the transcript for a long time without speaking. My daughter began to say something and then stopped. I said, "I don't want an apology today. I want to understand whether there is anything in our relationship that made you believe this was your only option. That is the conversation I would like to have." That conversation took several hours. It was not comfortable, but it was honest, perhaps for the first time in many years, in the way that only an encounter with consequences makes honesty possible. My son wept. I had not seen him weep since his father died. My daughter told me things about the previous years, about the fear that had been accumulating in her that I had not known. I told them things about my own experience of the distance that had grown between us that I had not said. I'm not going to tell you that this conversation fixed everything. That would be a different kind of dishonesty. But something that had been locked became, at least, accessible. I am still in my house. I have revised my will, a fact my solicitor communicated formally to both children with my blessing. The revisions are not punitive. They are clarifying. The care home inquiry was withdrawn. What I want to leave you with is not the recording or the documentation or the legal position, though all of those mattered. What I want to leave you with is this. The most powerful thing I did in those weeks was not to protect my estate. It was to insist on a conversation rather than a conclusion. To refuse to allow fear, mine or theirs, to be the last word on what we were to each other. The quiet do not win by being louder. They win by being more patient, more precise, and more willing to stay in the room when everyone else would rather leave. If this story stayed with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you would like more stories from the quiet souls who carry more than anyone sees, subscribe to this channel. There is more to tell.